Francesca gave you a good idea of that kid's life story, that like abused by his family, forced to abuse other parts of his family at the threat of death, was gonna be obligated to murder a random person to prove his loyalty to a gang he wanted nothing to do with, so he fled. Like, you would think if America was worth anything, it could save that child.
This is Off the Record. I'm Leah Toronto. Our report explores the pervasive, outrageous, and unethical practice of therapy note sharing in immigration cases. First, let's take a look at this clip from the Young Turks. Pay attention to the reason behind their outrage.
The kind of terror that this child, because he just turned 18, had been facing for years. He's been in detention for 2 years already. But the kinds of things that he's been facing are the kinds of stories that we've been hearing from minors for so many years. And
if you read the full article, which is available on the Washington Post by Hannah Dreyer, they do go into depth into Kevin's story, but there are other examples because this is a widespread policy that's affecting a lot of people. I want to give you a few ideas of how it's happened. So in Arizona, there was a 15-year-old who told a therapist he had participated in 50 murders. A number he quickly took back and said it had been a boast. It wasn't based on anything.
Obviously.
No, I think he killed 50 people.
Yeah, Jesus.
He was moved to high security detention and his asylum case remains under review.
That's totally a thing that makes sense.
Yep. In Virginia, a 16-year-old told a shelter therapist that his brother was wanted for murder in El Salvador. The therapist reported that the 16-year-old himself was involved in a murder and he was transferred that same day to secure detention. I'm glad that she sketched out sort of how we got here and how the policies of our government have created it.
Immigration, its history, how eugenics plays a role, how economics plays a role, how politics plays a role, the privatized for-profit detention system, mandated bed rates, the trafficking of minors, separating families at the border, putting kids in cages. All of it. It's super fucked up. However, we're not gonna get into that. Wanna become an informed citizen? Research that on your own time. What we are going to go off the record on right now is the role you, therapists, play in weaponizing therapy. Now, some of you may be thinking, I don't share my notes, but let me ask you this. What are you doing to ensure that other therapists aren't exploiting and abusing their power? To figure out exactly how we got here, we spoke to people who currently work in the field. In discussing the role therapists play in the note sharing scandal, here's what a few of our panelists had to say.
If they were not in ORR custody, general rules of therapy are like they have to follow HIPAA, and if it were a normal sort of like foster care situation where the kid is talking with a therapist, that therapist wouldn't be sharing the information that's conveyed by the minor. So it's not fair that those parties are not neutral and that ultimately their employer is the government and they have complete access to that information. Like it could completely ruin their case, the kid's case.
There's a lot of anger that frames sort of my view of the immigration system. It's just like such bullshit from top to bottom. It's right now there is no ability to claim asylum in this country right now, and we're expelling 4-year-olds onto the streets of the most dangerous countries in this hemisphere with no safeguards. It's insane. So I think that treatment period in ORR is really problematic. I think that weaponizing children's sort of development and their trauma, especially when sometimes the trauma inflicted by the government is then written up in a serious incident report and used against them as being a danger once they're, trying to be released from detention.
If you take that kind of information that somebody is expressing to you in confidence and you share it, it could turn into a great disadvantage for that person in their well-being. Great disadvantage. And I feel like as a therapist, as a budding therapist, it is completely irresponsible.
If you get down to the actual legalities of it, we in this country do not consider the notes of therapists to be public property. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea of therapists sharing their notes regardless.
Like Joseph said, I'm not comfortable with the note-sharing practices that are currently in place. Are you? Let's put this into context. There was a class action lawsuit filed in 1985 on behalf of detained migrant children against our government. It was settled in 1997. It's called the Flores Settlement Agreement. Why does it matter? Because there were human rights violations occurring 35 years ago that this agreement meant to correct. Part of it requires that the government implement standards relating to the care and treatment of children in immigration detention, including mental health. Guess what our current administration's response to that requirement looks like?
The United States will not be a migrant camp.
We do not have the luxury of pretending that all individuals coming to this country as a family unit are in fact a family. This administration has a simple message. If you cross the border illegally, we will prosecute you.
Not only aren't there enough attorneys to represent these youth, but these human rights infractions are still being hidden by our government. What about our government-employed therapists? What is their take on confidentiality? Does anyone give a rat's ass about confidentiality? Someone please tell me.
The importance of confidentiality. Well, first of all, everybody's life is very individual and sacred. To break that rule, it involves a great betrayal that could defeat a person and alter their lives in a harsh capacity. And to know that I'd be responsible for that is just completely unethical.
So when I meet with clients who are detained in the shelter, I always remind them, like, you're a therapist, you're a case manager, any person on this property works for the government, so you need to be careful what information you share with them.
You know, these kids are basically like monitored by people that are gonna like snitch on them. You know, they got people writing shit down, they got a whole system to take notes on you. And that's the real problem. I mean, like, I think if at least we need therapy to sort of prevent kids from like harming themselves based off of, you know, pre-existing issues. But to the extent that we're causing the issues and then like using the issues and then like, you know, having perverse consequences that like a child's been basically incriminating himself in a conversation where he's asked to be vulnerable.
One of the foundations, the fundamentals of doing therapy is confidentiality, so that you, as the client, can share things that you can't share in other contexts. And because the therapists are sharing the details of those sessions without the knowledge and the consent of the kids ahead of time, therapy is not happening. If anything, this is additional trauma on top of the trauma that these kids have already suffered. And that's the part about it that is just completely outrageous.
Message received. Confidentiality doesn't matter. At least not to the current administration with respect to detained migrant children.
Well, what are you doing then? You're directly competing with who? MS-13.
Yeah.
You are competing and saying, no, we can be worse than MS-13 and you should stay there. Essentially, you're becoming a gang.
You know, MS-13 is obviously a direct result of long-standing US policy, whether it was the Reagan supporting death squads in Central America, which killed, you know, several 100,000 people, which caused a huge migration crisis in the 1980s. US policy has its fingerprints all over this poor kid's life.
Yeah.
You know, from the moment he was born to the day he is deported back to Honduras, US policy has touched this kid's life in so many ways that are absolutely horrifying. And it goes to show that the Trump administration is obviously a worse iteration of what longstanding US policy is, but it is a just the tip of the iceberg of something that's been going on for so long in Central America.
Well, we've reached a breaking point.
So what can be done to stop therapists from doing this?
I get the general sense that they probably aren't doing as good of a job as a therapist can do. I think maybe sometimes they are acting as like fact gatherers instead of actually helping minors to process like the trauma and the fear that they've experienced.
You need to have smart people without an agenda sit down, work all this out, put costs on it, put benefits on it, and then try to do it. Until that happens, you're gonna have the same stuff over and over. And today's therapist notes, it'll be something else next week. They'll figure out some other thing that they can,
It's not about something that they escaped from, something that they heard about, something they might have dreamed about, which are some of the things that the migrant children have been ratted on. And one of the reasons why they are fleeing Central America is to escape gang violence. The gang violence that policies in the United States caused to be imported into Central America to begin with. There has not been a bright enough spotlight on this. I also feel like for those of us that do know, there is lack of clarity about how to intervene and how to resist. And I don't believe that most therapists condone this activity, but I don't think they understand how it puts our field in danger. It means that we don't do what we say we do. This is not about health and healing and well-being. This is the opposite of that. And it is in concert with an administration that explicitly does not care about well-being of human beings. And we must resist.
What more do you need? You heard from a government contractor, 2 immigration attorneys, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and a future therapist and family care provider. I'm done. Until you do something about this, fuck this. Let someone else have the final word.
I can't imagine being put in that situation. Where's the empathy? What if this was your child? What would you do? They have a responsibility to the community and to represent therapists with integrity. I'd want to understand where their integrity is at, why they're choosing to continue creating great detriment within our community and for innocent people. I don't understand their motive in continuing this process. All they have to do is stop. All they have to do is stop to make a difference, to better the lives of these families and children. Stop contributing to the problem.